They call him charming, brilliant, and unassuming. But his victims knew him by another name, Predator. Welcome to Horror and Crime. You've entered Infamous Criminal Minds, a series that examines the most dangerous and cunning individuals who walked among us, undetected, until their atrocities unraveled their carefully constructed facades. Today, we unravel one of the darkest minds of the 20th century, Ted Bundy. What makes a man capable of unimaginable cruelty while exuding a magnetism that draws people in? How does someone masterfully manipulate trust, weaponizing charm to shroud a horrific agenda? These are the questions that define Bundy's legacy, a legacy not of brilliance but of brutality cloaked in brilliance. In this episode, we'll dissect the mind and methods of Ted Bundy. From his tumultuous childhood to his meticulously orchestrated crimes, Bundy's story forces us to confront the uncomfortable question: is evil born, or is it shaped? Through his psychological manipulation, public deceptions, and ultimate downfall, we'll explore how Bundy maintained his deadly masquerade for years. Prepare to dive into the social and cultural way of life that allowed Bundy to thrive. We'll trace the sequence of his heinous acts and dissect his psyche, uncovering narcissistic tendencies and manipulative strategies that left victims and investigators alike ensnared in his web. Finally, we'll track the relentless pursuit by law enforcement and the unraveling of his carefully curated public image, a chase that captured the attention of an entire nation. As we journey into this story, consider the paradox of Bundy, a man who exploited societal norms of trust, who capitalized on appearances to deflect suspicion, and who, even in his trial, managed to command the spotlight. He was a law student, a Republican campaign volunteer, and a man who some described as destined for greatness. Instead, he became a symbol of calculated terror. What lies beneath the polished exterior of such a man? Let's begin to uncover the layers, one chilling revelation at a time. The 1970s were a time of upheaval, an era defined by cultural shifts and a growing distrust in authority. As traditional social structures fractured, communities faced an unsettling truth: serial killers were no longer the stuff of fiction. The term itself was newly coined, reflecting a grim reality. Predators like Ted Bundy could operate undetected, exploiting the chaos and fear of the time. Bundy's story begins in the picturesque cities of the Pacific Northwest. In places like Seattle, Olympia, and Salt Lake City, young women disappeared from safe, familiar settings, college campuses, parks, and even their own neighborhoods. These communities, once seen as havens of safety, were suddenly gripped by an invisible terror. Born in 1946, Bundy's formative years were marked by turbulence. Raised by his grandparents under the pretense that his biological mother was his sister, Bundy grew up in a household shrouded in deception. His family life, though outwardly conventional, was punctuated by control and secrecy. These early experiences may have planted the seeds of his later manipulative tendencies. In the 1960s and 70s, society placed immense value on appearances, particularly for young, educated men. Bundy understood this better than most. He used his good looks, intelligence, and articulate demeanor to craft a facade of success and respectability. To those around him, he seemed like the ideal student, boyfriend, and colleague. But beneath the surface, a sinister darkness brewed. Before Bundy became infamous, he was celebrated. Professors lauded his intellect. Politicians valued his ambition. Girlfriends admired his charm. His outward persona was meticulously curated to deflect suspicion. He volunteered for political campaigns and befriended law enforcement officers, presenting himself as the last person anyone would suspect. Yet even in his early years, there were glimpses of something darker. Peers described a young Bundy who struggled to connect, masking a simmering anger beneath his polite exterior. Small incidents, like his fascination with violent literature and his awkward attempts at forming relationships, hinted at the chasm between who he was and who he pretended to be. As Bundy grew older, the contradictions in his life widened. The perfect gentleman who helped elderly neighbors would soon become the nameless shadow stalking women in the dead of night. The social forces of the time, the trust in appearances, the lack of forensic advancements, and the burgeoning freedoms of a post-war society created the ideal conditions for a predator to thrive. The stage was set, and Ted Bundy was ready to step into the spotlight, though not in the way anyone could have anticipated. It began subtly, an occasional disappearance that could be dismissed as a runaway or a fluke. But soon a pattern emerged. From 1974 to 1978, Ted Bundy unleashed a wave of terror across multiple states, leaving dozens of families shattered and entire communities paralyzed with fear. Bundy's spree escalated quickly. In January 1974, his first confirmed attack shocked Seattle. Late at night, an intruder entered the home of an 18-year-old woman, bludgeoned her with a metal rod, and violated her in unspeakable ways. She survived, though with permanent injuries, unable to recall the attack. In the months that followed, young women began vanishing from campuses in Washington and Oregon. Linda and Healy, a 21-year-old college student, disappeared from her basement apartment in February. Her blood-stained bedclothes were the only trace left behind. Bundy's methods were as manipulative as they were effective. Disguised by his charm and pretense of vulnerability, he often approached women in broad daylight, wearing a cast or using crutches. He asked for help carrying books or loading items into his infamous Volkswagen Beetle, a vehicle that became both his lure and his trap. Once inside, his victims were overpowered, bound, and transported to secluded locations where the nightmare continued. The summer of 1974 marked a critical turning point. At Lake Sammamish State Park, Bundy approached two women in a single day, introducing himself as Ted. Witnesses described a man with a sling asking for help loading a sailboat. Both women were later found dead, their bodies discarded miles away. This brazen act in a crowded public space sent shockwaves through the region. As suspicion in Washington mounted, Bundy moved to Utah, where his spree continued. Over the next year, women disappeared from Salt Lake City and surrounding areas. One victim, Carol Duranch, escaped his clutches, providing a chilling account of his attempted abduction. She had been lured into his car under the guise of being a police officer, proof of Bundy's increasing boldness and confidence. Bundy's crimes spanned multiple states, each with its own string of missing women. Colorado became his next hunting ground, where he abducted and killed women from ski resorts and college towns. He left few clues behind, always staying one step ahead of law enforcement. With each act, Bundy seemed to grow more reckless and violent. His need for control evolved into a hunger for attention. By 1975, he began making mistakes, leaving witnesses and evidence that finally gave investigators a trail to follow. As the disappearances mounted, fear gripped the nation. Parents warned their daughters not to walk alone. Students carried whistles and mace. The press labeled him the campus killer, yet no one knew his identity. Bundy's crimes had transcended state lines, creating a fragmented investigation and an overwhelmed law enforcement system. The horror Bundy unleashed wasn't confined to the crimes themselves. His ability to blend seamlessly into society while committing acts of unspeakable brutality raised an unnerving question. How many more predators like him were hiding in plain sight? As investigators closed in, Bundy's reign of terror was far from over. He had one last game to play, one that would leave the world reeling. Ted Bundy was not born into infamy. He was born Theodore Robert Cowell in 1946 to an unwed mother in Burlington, Vermont. From the start, his life was marked by secrecy and deception. Raised by his grandparents, Bundy believed his mother to be his sister for much of his early childhood. This familial lie, paired with his grandfather's reportedly abusive behavior, likely planted the first seeds of distrust and manipulation. Bundy's early years appeared unremarkable on the surface. He excelled academically, avoided trouble with the law, and seemed like an average boy. Yet beneath this facade, troubling signs emerged. Bundy displayed an unsettling fascination with violence, reportedly consuming crime magazines and detective stories in his teenage years. Some accounts suggest he displayed the hallmarks of the McDonald Triad, a psychological theory linking childhood cruelty to animals, bedwetting, and arson to later violent behavior. Bundy's social interactions further hinted at his internal struggles. Classmates recalled a reserved, often awkward boy who found it difficult to connect. Despite his intelligence, he lacked the social ease he would later master as an adult. By his 20s, Bundy had transformed himself into the charismatic figure most people remember. Attending the University of Washington, he studied psychology, honing the skills that would later make him so adept at manipulation. Bundy cultivated a polished exterior, a clean-cut, articulate young man volunteering for political campaigns and earning accolades from professors. Yet even as Bundy outwardly thrived, cracks in his mask began to show. A romantic relationship with a wealthy woman during college ended abruptly, leaving him devastated. This rejection seemed to fuel his deep insecurities, sparking an obsession with status, power, and control. Friends and colleagues noted occasional bursts of anger that contradicted his otherwise calm demeanor, though these incidents were often dismissed. Bundy's psychological profile is a chilling study in contrasts. He exhibited classic traits of narcissistic personality disorder, an inflated sense of self-worth, a need for admiration, and a lack of empathy. His charm was not genuine, but weaponized, a tool to disarm those around him. Bundy's manipulative tendencies were evident in how he tailored his demeanor to different audiences, polite and intellectual with authority figures, disarmingly charming with peers, and predatory when alone with his victims. Experts often debate whether Bundy was a psychopath or a sociopath, distinctions that hinge on the interplay between nature and nurture. Psychopaths are thought to be born, their traits rooted in biological factors. Sociopaths, in contrast, are shaped by their environment. Bundy's case blurs these lines. His childhood experiences likely contributed to his violent tendencies, but his calculated actions and lack of remorse align with psychopathy. Bundy's crimes defy easy categorization, challenging existing criminological theories. The mask of sanity concept, coined by psychiatrist Hervey Cleckley, perfectly describes Bundy's ability to appear normal while harboring deeply deviant impulses. His intelligence and meticulous planning placed him in a category few criminals occupy, a predator who thrived not on chaos, but on control. Bundy's background offers more questions than answers. How does a boy from a modest household grow into one of the most prolific killers in history? Was his charm and intelligence a natural gift or a carefully constructed shield? As we move forward, the connection between his upbringing and his crimes will become clearer, revealing the terrifying interplay between nature, nurture, and choice. By 1975, law enforcement across several states knew they were dealing with a predator of exceptional cunning. His attacks were calculated, his victims seemingly chosen at random, and his ability to disappear left investigators grasping at straws. Yet cracks in his meticulous methods were beginning to form, setting the stage for a relentless manhunt. The first breakthrough came from survivors like Carol Duranche, whose harrowing escape provided police with a chilling description: a clean-cut, polite man driving a tan Volkswagen Beetle. Investigators pieced together a loose profile: white male, educated, and likely using charm or deceit to lure his victims. Bundy's crimes also reveal patterns. He targeted young, attractive women, many of whom bore a striking resemblance to his college ex-girlfriend. His method of subduing victims, often feigning injury or authority, showed a manipulative intelligence that frustrated law enforcement. FBI profilers were brought in to analyze the case, applying early techniques of behavioral analysis. They described the suspect as someone who thrived on power and control, driven by a deep-seated need to dominate. Yet, Bundy's outward normalcy complicated their efforts. Detectives remarked on the lack of traditional red flags. He wasn't an outcast or visibly unstable, making him an enigma even to seasoned investigators. Bundy's ability to adapt kept him a step ahead of law enforcement. He moved frequently, changing his hunting grounds to avoid detection. He altered his appearance, growing a beard, cutting his hair, whenever he felt the police closing in. He even taunted investigators by leaving little evidence, using gloves and cleaning crime scenes meticulously to erase traces of his presence. But Bundy's arrogance became his Achilles heel. He believed himself smarter than the police, which led to overconfidence. In Utah, he failed to properly restrain Carol Duranche, allowing her to escape. Her testimony became a crucial piece of evidence linking him to a series of abductions. The hunt for Bundy was marked by near misses. In 1975, a routine traffic stop in Utah led to his arrest after police found burglary tools and suspicious items in his car. Though not immediately connected to the murders, this encounter marked the beginning of Bundy's downfall. While in custody, Bundy feigned cooperation, using his charm to downplay suspicions. Yet, as investigators delved deeper, links to unsolved cases in Washington, Colorado, and Utah became undeniable. Witness testimonies and circumstantial evidence painted a damning picture, though Bundy continued to proclaim his innocence. News of Bundy's crimes dominated headlines, fueling public fear. Women altered their routines, avoiding secluded areas or venturing out alone. The press speculated wildly, turning Bundy into a near-mythical figure, a charming, elusive villain who embodied society's deepest fears. Yet, the public's fascination with Bundy also worked to his advantage. His courtroom appearances, marked by confident speeches and a well-kept appearance, drew spectators who struggled to reconcile his image with his actions. As law enforcement closed in, Bundy's confidence began to crack. His carefully constructed facade was unraveling, and the manhunt became a race against time. The question was no longer if Bundy would be caught. It was whether he could maintain his manipulative game long enough to escape justice once again. Bundy's capture came not with a dramatic standoff, but with a simple act of overconfidence. On August 16, 1975, a routine traffic stop in Utah led police to discover suspicious items in his car: crowbars, handcuffs, and a ski mask. Though initially arrested for evading the police, investigators quickly connected Bundy to the disappearance of Carol Duranch. It was the first thread in a web that would unravel his deadly secrets. Bundy's arrest was a turning point, but it was far from the end of his story. Even in custody, Bundy manipulated those around him, maintaining his charm and professing his innocence. His legal acumen came into play as he chose to represent himself, a decision that allowed him access to case files and positioned him as the center of attention in the courtroom. Despite mounting evidence, including eyewitness testimonies and physical links to several crimes, Bundy remained calm, confident, and disturbingly composed. Bundy's first trial in 1976 for the kidnapping of Carol Duranch resulted in a conviction and a sentence of up to 15 years in prison. However, Bundy wasn't finished. While awaiting trial for murder charges in Colorado, he escaped not once but twice. The first escape occurred in 1977 when he jumped from a courthouse window and evaded capture for 6 days. The second, far more audacious escape came later that year. Bundy sought a hole in the ceiling of his jail cell and fled. This time, he remained at large for over a month, traveling across the country and eventually arriving in Florida. In Florida, Bundy committed his most infamous crimes. On January 15, 1978, he broke into the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University, brutally attacking 4 women and killing 2. Weeks later, he abducted and murdered 12-year-old Kimberly Leach. These final acts were more chaotic and violent than his earlier crimes, reflecting a man increasingly driven by desperation and rage. Bundy's downfall came on February 15, 1978, when he was pulled over for driving a stolen car. This time, there was no escape. Evidence linked him to the Florida murders, and he was charged with multiple counts of murder, assault, and burglary. Bundy's 1979 trial for the Chi Omega murders was a media spectacle. Cameras captured every moment as Bundy, representing himself, cross-examined witnesses, and delivered impassioned arguments. His intelligence and charisma fascinated the public, even as the gruesome details of his crimes horrified them. Despite his efforts, the evidence was overwhelming. Bite marks on one victim matched Bundy's teeth, a pivotal moment in the trial. On July 24, 1979, Bundy was convicted and sentenced to death. A second trial for Kimberly Leach's murder in 1980 ended with the same outcome. Bundy's sentencing brought relief to victims' families and the broader public, but it also left lingering questions. How had this man evaded capture for so long? How many victims would never be found? And how could someone so outwardly normal commit such monstrous acts? Even as Bundy awaited execution, he continued to manipulate. In interviews, he alternately confessed to and denied various crimes, keeping investigators guessing. He granted interviews to authors and psychologists, using his final years to maintain a twisted control over his narrative. Ted Bundy's execution on January 24, 1989, marked the end of his life, but not his story. His case reshaped public perceptions of crime, leading to advancements in forensic science, victim profiling, and law enforcement coordination. Bundy's legacy remains a chilling reminder of how easily evil can hide in plain sight. Yet, even in death, Bundy's manipulative grip lingers. He once told investigators, "We serial killers are your sons. We are your husbands. We are everywhere." His crimes force society to confront a terrifying truth. Sometimes, the monsters aren't hiding in the shadows. They're standing right beside us. Ted Bundy's story is not one of brilliance or complexity, but of manipulation, cruelty, and tragedy. His crimes force society to grapple with unsettling truths about trust, charm, and the masks people wear. His victims, whose lives were senselessly cut short, serve as a painful reminder of the vulnerability we all share. Bundy was not a criminal mastermind. He was a predator exploiting societal blind spots. The advancements in forensic science, victim advocacy, and criminal profiling that arose from his case offer some solace, ensuring future predators would find it harder to evade justice. But the scars he left behind, both personal and societal, will never fully heal. Bundy's duality, a charming, educated man hiding monstrous tendencies, shattered preconceived notions of what a killer looks like. He manipulated societal expectations, blending seamlessly into communities that never suspected the danger lurking among them. His case serves as a stark reminder that evil often wears a disarming face. This story also highlights the importance of vigilance, the power of forensic innovation, and the courage of survivors and victims' families who stood up against an unimaginable darkness. Bundy's crimes sparked changes in how law enforcement agencies communicate across jurisdictions, ensuring predators like him would find fewer opportunities to exploit gaps in the system. His trial, one of the first to be televised, introduced the public to the unsettling charisma of a killer, forever altering how we view criminal justice. The public fascination with Bundy, his courtroom antics, his narcissistic arrogance, and even his final confessions, has continued to influence media portrayals of killers. But as we examine his story, it's crucial to shift focus back to his victims, whose voices deserve to be amplified above all else. Now, we turn the question to you. How should society balance understanding the minds of predators with honoring the lives of their victims? What steps can be taken to prevent individuals like Bundy from exploiting trust in the future? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspectives help us learn from these tragedies. And remember, this series is not just about understanding darkness, but finding ways to shed light on it. Let's ensure that stories like this spark meaningful change. As we conclude today's episode, prepare for another chilling exploration in infamous criminal minds. Next time, we'll uncover the twisted duality of John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown who entertained children at parties by day and committed unspeakable crimes by night. How did he maintain such a terrifying double life? Join us as we uncover the dark truths behind the man who hid his evil in plain sight. Evil may wear many faces, but the lessons we learn from these stories remind us to always look deeper.